about what they're doing much. And then one that's, of course, dear to your heart, Swytch, which is really fascinating, and maybe more than any other that I've seen, opened my eyes to how broad the industry applicability of this is. As you know from asking me about Tesla, and we also were the largest investors in Solar City and Enernoc. These were all companies that were looking at ways of ushering in a future of clean and green technologies. And in many cases, there's a huge transaction cost to interoperating with the rest of the economy, whether it's the zero emission ZEV credits that the Tesla deals in and brokers between large companies, whether it's what Enernoc does with demand response, or what Solar City does with being the largest solar installer in the world. We were aware of this whole data layer and this whole services layer that was broken, and when you and your team painted this picture of how it could be done on the blockchain, it sort of, the light bulb went off that this would solve many of the problems of distributed sort of monitoring and trade of what's fundamentally a broken system today in terms of transaction costs and monitoring costs.
Thanks for the ad.
Yeah.
It's always great to hear your elevator speech come back more beautifully formed from someone who's, because of course, that's the whole point about diversity and having ideas flow from lots of places.
Yeah.
Swytch, of which Evan is co-founder over here, is a renewable energy incentive that basically awards a token. The more renewable energy you build, the more token you get. But importantly, it also incents the pulling in of all of the information about energy that's produced, so you can award more based on carbon displacement. So in the global south, you award more because you're displacing dirty energy down there. And of course, it gets to a notion of proof of production, which is arguably cleaner than proof of work that burns energy. And what was interesting is, as we put all that together, there was kind of an insight from the energy side of the world that the existing mechanism, this strikes me a little bit of the same way that the SpaceX is related to traditional launch companies, which is carbon credits and such like that are very local. California has one, or the U.S. does or doesn't have one, and they come and they go. So they're anything but fluid and anything but very facile and frictionless. And so the idea is if you could find some way to build a market around that. And the other thing is the objective function thing, which is you go to the World Economic Forum, everybody agrees you have to solve the climate problem. And then they all bitch that there aren't governance mechanisms to do that. So in a way, it's like something's missing. People are annoyed.
Yeah, well, there's both the tragedy of the commons and the invisibility, or rather inscrutability of efficacy. So tragedy of the commons is well known. It's like, well, why, if I'm not getting credit for my contribution, why am I going to work really hard to make a contribution? And so that accreditation of, well, you've actually done an amazing amount of carbon offset with your work, that just capturing that data is essential. And the second would be relative to whom, right? Of all the things one could do on the planet, whether you take a very cynical Copenhagen consensus approach or take just a common person's approach to this, how do you know where the most bang for the buck exists? And you see, unfortunately, in some green energy projects, as we saw firsthand in wind, when the incentives get out of whack, you'll have all kinds of wind turbines built in California, for example, that are spinning idle, right? They're not going anywhere. They're not wired to anything because they got their credits for building the capability, not for actually doing something useful. And they were generating most of the green energy in the middle of the night when it was least needed, when standing base load was covering everything that was needed. So this would naturally accommodate for all that to give you global prioritization. It's almost like being a market maker in a very distributed sense for data streams that were formerly fractured.
Yeah, it's also a form of market make. A number of these things are market makers that use a lot more signals than price signals. Mm-hmm. And that goes along with the fact that we can ingest so much more data than before, and then we can use machine learning to make decisions very, very frequently. Mm-hmm. So, this is a pattern we see in Swytch, but you must see that pattern in lots of things. Oh, yeah. That's basically what makes robots work.